There's one last point I'd like to bring up. Independent of whether wrestling is a monopoly, of the fact that the matches are fixed, of whether wrestlers are blackballed, what do these shows do to the people who participate in them and who watch them? It is a great show, but does it encourage violence? Some psychologists told us they think it does. And the fans do frequently get violent. Sometimes the police have to throw them out. Maybe fake violence breeds real violence, and not just among the fans. It seems to egg on bullies like 6'6", 260-pound Dave Schultz.
Welcome back to another episode of Another 80s Podcast. My name is Whit, and I really appreciate you joining me. Today we're going to be finishing up our 80s wrestling conversation with my good friend Al. We'll be discussing our favorite matches, live contests, glow, wrestling being fake, and why 80s wrestling matters. I hope you enjoy. We've obviously covered a lot here, and we're kind of coming a little bit to the close. We're going to do some videos in a moment, but one thing that's important, because we obviously value 80s wrestling, a lot. It was a big part of growing up. What is your favorite 80s wrestling match?
There's a lot, but if I would narrow it down to one, it's kind of easy for me. For me, it was in part, I think this might have been like 1981. I might be off there. So I would have been 13 years old. And it's my heyday of wrestling. And I would go to the Philly Spectrum, not a lot, but a few times a year, maybe with my parents, with my buddies. I had a guy by the name of PJ, who I was friends with for a few years. He was really into wrestling like I was. And he and I went, and it was the boot camp match between Pat Patterson and Sergeant Slaughter. And they did boot camp matches throughout the East Coast. I think the most famous one was probably Madison Square Garden, but this was Spectrum, same time frame. And I don't know, crowd was on fire for it. We had floor seats, not close to the ring, probably, 20, 25 rows back, but just the electricity in the crowd. And, I remember Pat Patterson took off his boot and was hitting Slaughter over the head, cut him open, blood everywhere. And Patterson got the win. But, leading up to that, nowadays I don't think they let things breathe as much. And that's just, I think, the way things are. But back then, a feud would build, build, and build. On TV, you'd see it sort of play out slowly but surely, and that's what happened there. So that was sort of the culmination of that feud, and that was probably my favorite '80s match. There's some other that are up there. Obviously, the Snuka Morocco match where Snuka, loses the match, is in Madison Square Garden, but jumps off, does the splash off the top of the cage, and you have a lot of Cactus Jack was in the crowd, Tommy Dreamer, I think Bubba Ray Dudley, like all these guys were in the crowd as probably teenagers, and they all went on to be very famous wrestlers. So I think that match is up there. There are the two that come to mind, but the Patterson Slaughter one holds a place in my heart because I was there. How about you? You have a favorite?
I do. And real quick on the one you're talking about, especially, what do you 14 then? 13, 14?
I think I was 13. So yeah, I would think I was 13.
And at that age, I had not seen a live wrestling match, but that's got to be huge, being a kid, and you've seen it on TV, but seeing it in real life, the transition, because we all watch sports. I know this is sports entertainment, depending on what you think about it, but you go to a hockey game, you're into a hockey game. There's clearly some sort of extra energy in the that you get that you can't manufacture that at home, but that must have been pretty awesome at that age where you're walking in and you're seeing it up live. That must be awesome.
Yeah, it was. I ate it up, and my buddy was there. We had a great time. It was just the two of us. I'm assuming somebody dropped us off and then picked us up afterwards. Don't have recollection of that, but yeah, that was great. And then there's some. I gotta think. When I started to go to the NWA matches at the old Civic Center, that was probably, yeah, that might have been the late 80s. I would have to look at that. I'm sure it was late 80s, early 90s, but without knowing that for sure, I don't want to nominate one of those matches. But we would always get really close seats, first few rows, and some of those matches were really good. Um, I Quit match between Magnum TA and Tully Blanchard was pretty historic. First barbed wire match I ever saw was
Oh,
in the NWA, um, Rhodes against Blanchard at the Philly Civic Center. I would have to look back. That might be the '80s wit. That could be 1990. I don't remember, but yeah, I'll go back to what I said first, Slaughter, because it was, I don't know what you remember or have seen, but on TV it was like, hey, if you could break out of the Cobra Clutch, you would get $10,000. So every week there would be some preliminary wrestler would come out, he would slap on the Cobra Clutch, and nobody could break out. And then one day Patterson, was talking about like, hey, I think I have it figured out how to get out. And sure enough, he did it. Took him a while, but he got out. After he got out, Slaughter hit him over the head with a chair, cut him open. Which I have to look back. I don't think he bladed. I think it was a stiff chair shot that busted him open. I would want to look at it again. Um, and then that's where the feud started.
well, we're going to be talking about Pat Patterson in a different way shortly when we start doing some videos. But for me, I mentioned it earlier in the recording. It was a 1986 match between Bundy and Hogan, and I wasn't there, but it was at the Spectrum. And
Hmm.
seeing, I touched on this before, when you saw matches that were taking place at the Spectrum, even though I was 20 miles away or something, it felt cooler. It was just like, hey, that's in my backyard.
Yeah.
But that's where you've got Monsoon talking about pandemonium breaking out in the Spectrum. Bundy hasn't been around for too long. And even things like this, where impromptu trivia question, where did King Kong Bundy hail from?
Atlantic City, right?
Yeah, Atlantic City.
Yeah.
Like even something like that, it just seemed cool. Like I didn't know the
Yeah. Yeah.
guy.
Sort
I
of
don't,
local.
yeah, yeah.
No, he got his start in the Mid South, I think. And it was the 5 count thing, right?
Hmm.
Because he was so big. And then, yeah, obviously worked his way up to the WWF at some point. So what did you like about that match?
Well, seeing it on TV, I think at the time, because I'm 12, it was probably the most crowd energy I'd ever seen because you're pretty close to peak Hulk Hogan, right? You're a few
Hmm.
years after he goes in the WWF. We've got some WrestleManias under our belt. He's got that music video out. I'm a Real American, whatever it is. Like it is, he's pulsing. Everybody's coming to see him. And I'm certainly a big fan at that age. But Bundy, because not that he had the biggest persona, but he was just such a huge guy, he seemed a little bit more scarier than other wrestlers. And it wasn't just a normal, like, well, Heenan's there too. And I loved Bobby the Brain Heenan. He was
Yep.
just a great manager. He, of course, gets involved. But at one point, Adrian Adonis gets into the mix, but he's dressed up as a woman.
Oh yeah, yeah. This
Yeah.
was sort of like I know Adonis was like a tough New Yorker,
Mhm.
like when he was AWA tag champs with Jesse Ventura, even coming over to the WWF, he tagged with Dick Murdoch, and he like that. That was who he was. I think he was legitimately from New York. He was kind of a tough guy, weird, always had a weird build, but very athletic.
Mhm.
And then he just kind of let himself go, started, being adorable Adrian. So I don't know where that fell into that continuum.
I don't know exactly what part of his history that was either, but at the time, I don't know what I was thinking. But like when I go back and watch it now, there's something that's just great about it because he gets in the ring, he interrupts it, they start ganging up on Hogan, but of course it goes awry and Hogan ends up winning. But I still remember Monsoon being like, he's dressed as a spectator. Like he's wearing a white dress. He's huge. He's got this blonde wig, probably from Kmart. Nobody
Yeah,
thought like he was like but
it's just
like it
some
was just like
random woman.
but that's how sneaky he was, Al. Like he would
He
just
was.
like there's no
He
way he could have just
was.
approached in the middle of the match and just
And
sideswipe him.
they could easily get by security.
Exactly. As a kid and even as an adult, I think it's awesome stuff like that because you always want the third man coming in is always entertaining. And sometimes that's the manager, but that was always cool. But at the end of the match, it's just Hogan it's got to be a couple 3 minutes of him just doing his normal calls to the crowd, the ear
Yeah.
thing and just flexing. And the crowd was just electric. And I remember that. And even now when I watch it, I just kind of get transported back to seeing that. Like, I'm sure there were better matches. I don't think it was technically the greatest match I'd ever seen.
Well, it's Hulk Hogan. You're not going to get a technical
Yeah.
match,
Well,
but
even
it's one of
Mike.
those things. Like I'm no fan of Hulk Hogan for multiple reasons, but I could recognize like he transformed the business. He was the right guy at the right time, and he had a huge personality. Was a tall dude, well built, and yeah, was pretty good on the mic. So yeah, they flocked to him. People loved him.
Especially for someone my age, like it was
Yeah,
a pinnacle of some sorts, at least in terms of popularity. But yeah, that would be my favorite match.
nice.
Okay, Al, we're going to do a few videos here, and I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk a little bit, at least, about the first video we're going to show here. Certainly was I don't know if it's a big part of wrestling in the '80s, but it definitely was there, and I have to admit, I watched a lot of it. So here we go.
She went out hunting for game and she trapped a slot machine.
So that's David McLean of
Yep.
Glow fame.
I definitely loved how it always, not always, but often started off with some stupid joke like that. And when you see all the female wrestlers dancing, like he is really into it. Like he's the only guy around, 25 female wrestlers. So yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody watched Glow. Definitely played on, stereotypes, looked phony as all hell, but there was something about it. And I guess, being a teenager and, some of these women are attractive, just, kind of was like a magnet, I think, right? It was just so stupid, but it was so 80s, right? It was fun.
Yeah,
Soul
absolutely.
Patrol. Hollywood and Vine were my favorites. I will say that.
I enjoyed watching Big Fiji. Was it Big Fiji? Was that her name?
Was it Mount Fiji?
That's right. Yeah.
Little Fiji. I liked, I always felt bad for Little Fiji. She would get her ass kicked, but then Mountain Fiji, which was it her sister or cousin, would come and save her, against Matilda the Hun, right?
Sorry, just went a little bit nuts there with yeah, exactly. And like the wrestling wasn't the greatest for sure. I would say the female
No.
wrestlers that were in the other leagues were better. Like this was more fluff for sure.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
But I have to admit it was very, very watchable. It seems like so much of this is based on like with the music and stuff. It's just like the Super Bowl shuffle comes out in like what was that, 85 or something. It's right around this time.
Yep.
And it's not like rap wasn't around beforehand, but it's every organization's now, yeah, we should do a rap as well.
Yeah, it definitely, and it's funny. Like I know like younger girls were into it because, hey, I got to see somebody who looks like me and they're in the wrestling ring. So I remember the crowd. I think they were all filmed at the Riviera in Las Vegas. Um, there'd be a lot of young women in the crowd, but then there'd be these like middle-aged dudes just kind of there to, look at girls in, skimpy outfits sort of, wrestle. I don't know. It's just a dichotomy of people I feel that were into it.
Like probably for some of these guys, they weren't the biggest wrestling fans, and the strip bar didn't open till later, so they were like, "Well, this will get me there."
No, yeah, I think you're 100% right. It was, yeah, it had time and a place, kind of fizzled out over the years, but yeah, Hollywood Vine, Little Fiji, Colonel Nanuchka, right? She was from Russia, the farmer's daughter.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it was just trying to go. You know what? My favorite one, actually, not my favorite, but the Housewives. Do you remember them?
Oh yeah.
They were like bigger women. They came out like in muumuus, and they had like the rolling pins and the whatever the stuff you put on your face
Mm-hmm.
as a woman to make. I don't know, but yeah, they were just cracked me up.
And I don't know if I'm making this up. Did they use household items sometimes as weapons? Am I making that up?
like the housewives or just anybody?
Like other than rolling pins, did they ever put anything else out there? Like that might just be something where I'm just imagining because of how ridiculous it was, but I don't know if that's true or not.
I don't remember like a spatula or something.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not sure. You had the Heavy Metal Sisters. I know they brought a blowtorch to the ring. I did see blood once. I think it was totally phony. Somebody had like a spike. One of
Okay.
the demented, like they had some demented carriers, like characters rather, and she drove the spike into somebody's arm, and there was blood. But I'm sure it was nobody was blading. It was probably just a blood capsule or something.
Clearly it wasn't so much like I don't even remember the storylines being particularly good,
No.
but one of the things I loved about it is probably if somebody hadn't seen Glow and you were like, okay, what do you think this wrestler's name is? You had a good shot at getting
Well, yeah. Well, I think you had like Little Fiji. She was Hawaiian. Little Feather, right? You know, a small woman. She came out like in a headdress. And then there was another one. But yeah, it was, you're right. You probably had a 1 in 3 chance to just guess it. You know, Spanish Red. Kind of going through the names.
Well, it
But
definitely
yeah,
seems
it was
like
classic. I mean,
it definitely seems like they got bored at times because there was Little Fiji, then they're like, well, you look a little bit Arabic, Little Egypt. It just kind of
well,
like
no,
they
exactly. And I'm sure, the Little Egypt was from Tennessee or something, She had a good tan.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I thought that was important because it was on longer than I thought. I looked it up. It was on technically like 86 to 92, and then I think it converted into was just wow, Women of Wrestling, where I don't know if it was the same ownership, but you saw some familiar people there.
Yeah, David McLean. Again, I know nothing about the guy other than he's been involved in this form of women's wrestling for a while, and Women of Wrestling. I think was that a little more legit. Like they kind of got rid of the over the top characters, or am I making that up? I don't remember.
I have to admit, I don't remember it that well, but I mean, I would imagine something that's somewhere in the 90s isn't as, you know, cheesy as Glow in the mid to late 80s. That's just more of a guess more than a
Yeah, you did that
remember.
now, it wouldn't work, but it worked perfectly back then.
Let's take some time to rewind.
So you think wrestling's easy? Well, put on your tights and boots and step into the ring. Cash in your wrestling knowledge to win big bucks and the ultimate wrestling entertainment package. Just pick up your touch-tone phone and dial 1-900-8604-GAME. Or are you scared?
I challenge you to dial 9. Beat me in a battle of wrestling trivia.
You could win $100 a day or the mega grand prize of large screen TV, a VCR, and a videotape library of wrestling's greatest hits. But wait, that's not all. You'll also win a complete Nintendo package, including the ultimate game controller, the Power Glove. But you gotta get past the big guy.
I dare you.
Dial 1-900-8604-GAME. Wrestle Trivia. You and your telephone, the ultimate tag team. $2 the first minute, $1 each additional minute. Callers under 18 get your parents' permission before you dial.
Okay, Al, and our last video is not something that was actually part of any wrestling show or anything like that. But as wrestling was, I don't know if it was peaking at the time, but just gaining more and more traction on more and more Saturday mornings, more pay-per-views. Clearly, news organizations are going to pick up on it. And unfortunately for John Stossel, he found his way into the mix and decided to do a little report on wrestling and specifically whether it was real. And he ran into Dave Schultz for an interview. Let's let it go here.
Afro ever.
Yeah.
Used to be tag team partner of Eddie Mansfield, the wrestler who's just told us how every match is fake. I asked Schultz questions that I assume all wrestlers have been asked dozens of times.
What? Is this a good business?
Yeah, it's a good business. I wouldn't be in it if it wasn't.
Why is it a good business?
Because only the tough survive. That's the reason you ain't in it. And this punk holding the camera reading he ain't in it. Reading these rednecks out here ain't in it because it's a tough business.
I like how he's calling somebody else a redneck.
Wait, is that all you got?
I'll ask you the standard question. You know,
Standard question.
I think this is fake.
You think it's fake?
Boom.
Is that fake?
Oh,
Stossel's
man.
on the
What the hell's
ground.
wrong with you? That's
Shouldn't
open ass
laugh.
fat, huh? You think it's fake? You come.
The second one's bad. Oosh.
What do you mean?
Yeah. Stossel just gets the hell out of there. I mean, I would do the same thing. Schultz was a big dude, right?
Oh
Like
yeah, like
6'6". Yeah, Schultz was a big dude. I mean, he was 6'6". I mean, what wasn't muscle bound, but he was muscular and probably 6'6", probably 260, 270, and just had a just had an attitude, man. Always did. Like just kind of blurred the lines of what's what's legit and what's not. And you saw that look in his eye, right? He's kind of has this crazed look in his eye, I feel.
yeah, and I don't want to say I get it because that almost makes it seem like I'm excusing him hitting Stossel. But from what I've heard before, and you know better than me, didn't McMahon kind of just say, "Look, Schultz, you do what you need to do," and kind of set him up to like, "Hey, show this arrogant reporter what fake looks like."
Yeah, yeah. I think it's somebody out of all the wrestlers in the federation at that time, the one guy who, you would predict would do something like that would have been Schultz, right? So, I think you were kind of leading a horse to water, so to speak, and knowing that he would drink it up. But yeah, and that was, it's funny because Stossel mentioned Eddie Mansfield, like they used to be partners. There was a history between Eddie Mansfield and Stossel. So, it's funny, like back in the early, and can I go into this? Is
Yeah,
this
go for it.
okay? Yeah, yeah. So, is wrestling fake? Is it real? So Eddie Mansfield, the Continental Lover was his nickname, probably wrestled for, 6, 7 years. But he went on the Stossel's program and basically gave him all the secrets, showed him, even bladed for him, showed him how they bleed and stuff. So, that's why I think in that opening, Stossel mentioned, hey, he was tag partners with Eddie Mansfield, who, was previously on our program.
And you could tell, I think, he reacted poorly to that. Like, you're probably right. Schultz was going to lose it one way or another, but in the intro to the interview, because there's a longer version of it, because he's saying, there's wrestlers saying it's not real and everything like that, where I think most people kind of understand, but we'll talk about this about what's fake and what's real and what that really means in general. But afterwards, because Stossel retreats very quickly, like he's just like, I've had enough of these two open-handed slaps.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
gets the hell out of there. But then it goes back when you're watching, I don't know if it was 2020 or 60 Minutes, whatever it is. Barbara Walters is like, so that looked horrible. And he's like, yeah, you really hit me pretty hard. And
Yeah,
she's
yeah.
like,
He's like
so
lost some hearing, right?
yeah. And he ends up suing him,
Yeah.
which I think there's, I don't know if it's a payout from WWF or whether it's him personally, but money is exchanged. But I don't know whether that did more for wrestling or less because it certainly brought some heat. And I think there was probably, well, there's at least two groups of people. There's the people who are listening to Barbara Walters going, this is what happens because he starts off before the interview going, a lot of people wonder whether this fake violence leads to real violence. And they had some video of fans getting into fights, and very often the police have to break up fights and whatnot, where now you've got, here's the evidence, these guys are unhinged. And you have Barbara Walters, who millions and millions of Americans trust, going, oh my God, yeah, this is not that there's a wrestling panic or something like that, but you've got that group. And then you've got the other group who maybe they're wrestling fans or they just love it when, Stossel comes off as arrogant. Like he could have played that better. He
Probably.
looks like he's up in his ivory tower looking down on these stupid wrestlers and their fans, and he got what he deserved. Like that. I think that's probably the two major
Yeah,
groups of people.
you're probably right. I think McMahon definitely had a contentious relationship with the media at the time, like, not only with this, which yeah, I think Schultz is saying McMahon was, sort of behind it. He took his directions, and yeah, I think that WWF did settle with Stossel, and rightfully so. Like you can't do that to somebody, regardless of what they're asking and how pompous they are. But yeah, Bob Costas, right? Like McMahon, and was Costas pushing him? Maybe a little bit, but now that had less to do about legitimacy of wrestling and more of steroids and stuff like that. But I think McMahon saw himself as that, like that anti-hero, right? Just kind of, hey, we're a little underground at the time. Now his goal was to make it bigger and more widely acceptable. but at first taking over for his father, he knew it was something that was it was looked down upon to follow wrestling, and his goal was to bring it up so it was more widely accepted. But I think he realized where he stood and pushed back, the way he felt was best to push back to kind of stick up for his company.
I think everything you're saying is very true there, and it's great TV. That I will say for sure. That interview is just awesome.
Yeah, no, it's I always like David Schultz. I don't know why, but I just liked his style.
He definitely seemed like the real deal, and it showed there.
Yeah, absolutely.
After finishing the video of Stossel on the receiving end of two open-handed slaps by Dave Schultz, I feel like this is a good transition to not whether wrestling's fake or real, but I remember as a kid, there'd be times where my brother, maybe myself, the two of us were just watching wrestling. My dad would walk by and you'd get that comment of, that's fake, right? As if we couldn't figure out the coincidence of a wrestler stamping his foot on the campus really hard as he punched somebody, as if that was just over our heads and we thought this is how fighting actually occurred.
Yeah.
It would certainly be annoying, but I never argued with my dad or tried to convince him that it wasn't. It's a weird thing to be a fan of wrestling and just know that, yeah, this is a job to some sort. But I guess my question is, when it comes to that, when people call it fake, what does that do for you? What does that mean for you? When you hear that, was your interpretation back then different than it is now?
Yeah.
Were you ever insulted at the time? Did you
Yeah.
ever defend it? Well, talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yes. Yeah. Obviously, like if somebody says it's fake now, I'm like, yeah, of course it is. Like there's, and I know they don't like that work. They like choreograph better, I think, but it's fake. Like they're not really punching each other, right? They're not really kicking each other. But back then, like it's funny, like in the 80s, in my heyday, when I was into it, I knew it was phony, right? I still liked it. I knew it was phony. But if somebody questioned me on it, I would I would defend it as though it wasn't. It was sort of a weird predicament to be in. Like I probably knew more than them and how they pulled off things and what they did with the blading and stuff, but I felt the need to defend it, and I did. And it was it's just a weird predicament to argue against something that is 100% true. But I found myself in that predicament anyway, and I did.
I think that's probably pretty common where part of it is the question's clumsy. It's fake. Where I understand if you're in the wrestling business, it's certainly not fake. Like you said, people are getting cut, people are getting hurt.
Yeah.
There's this happened, I think I don't know if it was the late 90s or early 2000s, where there was a bunch of wrestlers on Politically Incorrect. And I think it was Piper.
Yeah.
I think Heenan may have been there as well. Somebody
Sting.
else. Oh yeah, that's right, Sting. And there was a female there too. I can't remember.
Medusa Michello, yeah.
Thank you. But yeah, there's part of it where Meyer and Maher comes off. I'm not a big fan of that guy. Like he seems very condescending at points, but he says it's fake, right? And Piper pretty much just takes the question himself, and it's just a clumsy question where is the storyline real? No, like when the Flyers play the Penguins, the storyline's real. They're both trying to score more goals than the other one. They have a goal to make the Stanley Cup. Hopefully nobody is in on it. Hopefully the refs aren't trying to adjust things. The managers aren't going to get involved to play. It's real. But he pointed out just kind of the stupidity of it. But then nobody ever really kind of says, hey, don't ask it that way. But he points out some things. I think like the most, probably the thing that was the most direct is tell that to Owen Hart's wife.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to argue with that one. Like clearly there's some realism to this, and
sure,
showing some injuries that he's had.
Yeah, he pulls down his pants. He's got a bruise. Although, I mean, I'm not belittling it. Owen Hart died not from wrestling. He died from being, coming down, making an entrance into a wrestling ring.
And I think that's where the part is where the question isn't the same for both of them, right? Like Mara is really just asking, this is all staged, choreographed, as you put it.
The fans are in on it kind of thing. Like you're just having a good, yeah, I think he gets it because that's true. The fans are in on it. I think Mara is correct there, but yeah, there's probably a better way to ask the question so you don't get that visceral response from this is what people do for a living,
And I think that's the part where you hear this so many times in wrestling interviews, respect. Just like it, especially Ric Flair. There's so many times this is disrespectful to like just like to the wrestling business. Where
Mhm.
I think that that's something I tend to side with wrestling leagues, organizations is for so many years, people just kind of focused on, yeah, this isn't real.
Sure.
But if you're in that and you're doing all the work that you have to do to stay in shape, the stuff you have to learn, the guys who don't make it, the guys who are just a blip, and the ones who do make it, it's just the stories they must have to tell. That's one of the things when they go, this is fake. It just seemed like the wrong way to say it. Where even for me, just like you were saying, you want to defend it, but you're kind of arguing two different points.
You are. And back in the 80s, like with the stops, like there was this thing, like, is it real? Is it not? They would do exposés on it, obviously, like Stossel was doing. Like you really needed to do that. Like 2020 is a legitimate news organization, right?
Mhm.
And they're trying to prove out that wrestling isn't 100% on the up and up. And it just seems funny in hindsight, right?
I think part of it is there's this group of people, in this case is some news organizations, that are almost annoyed that people are into wrestling. Like, look at these rubes. Like
Hmm.
they'll believe anything. We
Yeah,
gotta get them out of this. They can't go on believing this. This could damage them. They're going out. They're having real wrestling matches. People are getting hurt. I Part of me does think, and I certainly could be wrong in this, that they're just looking down on wrestling and
yeah,
wrestling fans, and they're doing some sort of civic good, as
sure.
if like it's kind of like people love. There's a whole bunch of people love soap operas. I don't remember
No,
these exposés being like, "Hey, that's not what love is really like."
sure. No, you're right. You're right. Everything is whether it's movies and whatnot, it's part of the show. But you're right. I think there is, back then it was, these people, they're being fooled. They don't, if they only knew it wasn't legit, maybe they wouldn't be fans of it. Well, I don't think people give a shit. They like it. How many people stopped, when these exposés came out. Like I remember one where they were showing, it was a match at the Spectrum. It was Jack and Jerry Briscoe. It was a tag match, and they like slowed down the punches, right? And they're obviously missing, right? It's not a question. Um, like nobody was like, "Oh my God, I'm never watching." Maybe there was a couple, I don't know, but nobody was like, "Yeah, you know what? That I'm done with wrestling now. It's all these years I thought it was on the up and up. Now I realize they're not really punching. You don't have a 6'6", 250-pound guy punching a guy in the face 5 times.
Yep.
I mean, the guy would be dead, right? I mean, if you do that big hitting you, there'd be some blood, there'd be broken bones. So yeah, I don't think wrestling fans cared. And you're right. I think Stossel and others thought that was the magic pixie dust. Like, hey, we're gonna reveal this, and people are gonna be pissed off.
I want to believe, I know it's true. I would love if it was possible to have a poll after that ran that segment. Like, what do you think about wrestling? Are you for it, against at some point? And here are the percentages. And then after that segment, I want to believe that people became more fans of wrestling just
Yeah,
because he got
maybe.
slapped.
Yeah. It's funny, Whit, but I think you hit on something that's accurate there. But now it's not. I don't think it's looked down as much now to be a wrestling fan as it was, in the 70s and maybe the early 80s, early to mid 80s.
I think you're right, because so many of them are stars. They go into movies, they have their own TV shows. Where when I think back then, Hogan comes out of it. He's got No Holds Barred. Piper's in a few movies. Trying to think like who back then in the 80s, who comes out of it beyond wrestling other than those two. Like Lou Albano's in music videos, but
Yeah,
it's
not
really
not to the
short.
same extent. No, I don't. Piper and Hogan were I mean, would you say Jesse Ventura?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Hmm,
Yeah,
yeah,
definitely.
for I think he was in some movies, but obviously became right governor of Minnesota
Hmm.
as an independent. Yeah, I don't. They're the two obvious ones. It's funny. There was always guys even back in the 70s that had like bit parts, and I used to get hyped about it, like Tor Kamada
Hmm.
was like he was a bodyguard. Like he was just a big dude, and like he would make his way into a movie where he had no speaking parts, but he would play a bodyguard, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's Tor Kamada. Terry Funk was Sylvester Stallone had a movie about wrestling where Terry Funk was in it, was pretty prominent in it, but that was probably in the 70s. I forget what that. Do you know what that is, Wit?
Like when I think Terry Funk, I always think Roadhouse, but you're right. He was in a bunch of things. I'm not remembering the Stallone wrestling one though.
Yeah, it's I used to watch it on Prism all the time as a kid at my grandparents' house. Yeah, I'll remember it. I'll look it up here. But yeah, but you're right. I don't think there were few and far. Paradise Alley.
I've never
Um,
seen it, but I've heard of it.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, I liked it as a kid. But yeah, now obviously you got John Cena, Roman Reigns, Steve Austin, The Rock. Was huge. Obviously, it's just a different world that we live in.
It's gotten so much bigger, but yeah, it's just funny when you look back, especially that interview and just that question where, yeah, it was probably pretty divisive at the time, but not so much anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's sort of why I got into wrestling a little bit. Like it was different. Like you were seen a little differently by your peers if you were in the wrestling. I don't know. That's how I looked at it. So it was almost like it was, getting back to like punk rock and stuff. Like, you had to be that was seen as a little different, right? And I
Mhm.
thought at the time wrestling sort of was too. So for me it fit. Like I definitely got into pro wrestling before I got into that type of music, but like that's not like pro wrestling was sort of embraced in that world, and I didn't know it at the time, but maybe that's what drew me to it a little bit. Both wrestling and the type of music I listen to. I don't know, just a thought there.
Yeah, I think that makes sense to a degree where it's something where you're in the know and a lot of other people aren't.
Yeah, precisely.
All right. Well, I think we got one final question here. I think we've covered a lot, which I've loved. This has been a great conversation. Here's the last question. What made wrestling during the 80s? That period is as specific as we can be here. I know you've watched wrestling before and after, but what made it so great? Why did it or why does it matter?
Yeah, I think kind of what I just said in a way. I'll expand on that, but it mattered because in a weird way it gave me and gave others maybe a small sense of belonging, right? Where maybe you struggle to belong elsewhere. Like I wasn't the most popular dude, especially in middle school. I think moving from Havertown, Delaware County to Westchester, going to a new middle school, knowing nobody day one, like sixth grade middle school, was really tough for me the first 2 years. And that, looking back, that was sort of when I really got into wrestling.
Mhm.
And maybe for me, it was sort of that escape from reality where, all right, this isn't necessarily going really well. I don't have a ton of friends at school. There's some struggling going on there. This was something that in a weird way maybe helped me through that. So that's sort of on a microcosm, like a micro level. But you know, I think it matters because it sort of paved the way to like in the early '80s, like what ultimately got bigger in society with wrestling, with Vince McMahon, like pushing it to the next level. Kind of the foundation was laid in the '80s of what to do, what not to do, how wrestling looks, how wrestling feels, how are interviews conducted. Like a lot of that, really coming from the '70s where it was a little more, I'll say bland. The '80s started to get a big personality, and wrestling did as well. And that was even before McMahon started. Now, again, he kind of took it to the next level, sort of made it cartoonish in ways, but I don't know. I think that's why it was important to me, and I think that's why it had some level of importance in society as well as we kind of got faster, more technology being used, but it just gave the foundation to what was to come. I don't know. That they're my two thoughts, both on a micro and a macro level.
Those are very interesting reasons because they're very different from one another. But I always like it when something has extra meaning than, hey, I watched it. Yeah, we watch a whole bunch of stuff, but there's probably things that are few and far between that actually start to matter so much. So I love your rationale for getting in it. For me, I was nowhere near the wrestling fan that you or a couple of our other friends were. or are. But back then, I certainly liked the big introductions, the venues where they had them, just the idea of, I mentioned the third man earlier, when a guy comes out, he runs into the ring, slides under the ropes. There's always something that in movies or in sports in general, the squared circle,
Yep.
the kind of the arena that we, even though this isn't real combat, but that's where at least the entertaining portion is. That always made it more interesting to me. But one of the things that always I liked as a kid was, and this went beyond just wrestling, when you watched a show, like a TV show, and the actor or actress was doing their own stunts, that meant something. You were
Hmm.
kind of like, okay, hey, they actually threw that punch, or they weren't jumping off rooftop to rooftop, but when somebody leapt over a fence real quick and the camera was on them the whole time, that made a difference to me. Like even in the one of the greatest car chases of all time in the 60s, Bullet with Steve McQueen. He's not
Hmm.
doing the whole car chase, but there are times where you see that is him clearly driving, like
Yeah.
skidding out, just almost side swiping another vehicle. That makes a difference. And then you notice things like, I was a big James Bond fan. Still like Bond films, but certainly loved him more. Where one summer I watched pretty much every Bond film, and you see Roger Moore, who's now in his 50s, and he can do maybe 10% of the stuff. With wrestlers, the guy you see in the interview before, the guy you see in the interview after is the same guy who's going in, and
Hmm.
he's doing the things. And that was the reality portion where we knew the storyline wasn't legit. That wasn't really an Undertaker. Kamala was not from Uganda or whatever it was.
Yes.
It
Yes.
was just, but at the same time, when the jumping around, the coming off the ropes, the slaps that you could hear probably 100 yards away if you were there live, that always seemed really cool to me. And just the idea that they made these, they seem like modern day superheroes. Because, like you said, like we know that they're not really 6'8", they're probably 6'5". They're not
Hmm.
really 375, they're probably 310. But
Sure.
even when we watched that AWA video, the rap video, when Scott Hall and Kurt Hennig are by those those Playboy girls on the end, they are just massive. Like I
They're
know they're
huge. Yeah.
small.
They're
Like
like a
these are,
foot taller. Yeah.
yeah, like these guys are massive, and that was something that just I was always just super impressed by that. And it almost seemed like modern day superheroes, that people were that big, could do those things, and it was mesmerizing to a degree.
Yeah. Great athletes all around, for their size. Many of them are, like you said, are tall, like 6'4", 6'5", and to be able to do what they do in the ring and take that beating. I mean, there's something could be said, that is, in a way, that is sort of superhuman. Especially in the 70s and 80s, they weren't. I think they wrestle less frequently now. Back then they were wrestling 5, 6, 7 nights a week.
Mhm.
Just and that itself is crazy. If you think about it. So yeah, it was awesome. It was an awesome time for multiple reasons, but yeah, for me that'll be the pinnacle of pro wrestling.
All right. Al, thanks so much for being the first guest
All
on
right.
the show. I really had a great time rewinding here. Yeah, these are the types of conversations I love having and looking forward to having more.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. Hopefully, your listeners will find it interesting, and maybe they learn something new. Maybe they just go down memory lane. It's always fun to take a stroll through memory lane and rekindle your love of wrestling or whatever it is, anything 80s. But yeah, thank you very much for having me as your first guest. It means a lot to me.
My pleasure. That was the final part of my 80s wrestling conversation with Al. The original plan was to splice more videos into this episode, but the sound on some of the videos made it more difficult than I liked. Hence, I couldn't cover some of the topics like managers and rock and wrestling the way I had hoped. I may still release an episode with the videos and our commentary, but my skills dealing with sound are going to need to improve to make that happen. I'll get there though. In the meantime, it's time to switch gears and move on to the next topic. Choose Your Own Adventure books. I'll talk a little about the history along with their tidal wave of popularity. As always, thanks to Full Boy Media for producing the theme music for another 80s podcast, and thanks so much for taking the time to rewind with me. Catch you later.